Yeah, government's not going to save you. We've identified a lot of the things that are wrong with a current system, and my main message to people is do what you can to help yourself, and if that's moving what savings you have into hard assets that can't be diluted or confiscated or debased, that is one thing you can do. And another is, read as much as you can. Read Economics in One Lesson. That's a great book. You can read that in 2 days. Try and understand what has gone wrong with the system.
Oh, here we go. Freddie.
Peter.
Oh, man, so good to see you.
You too, man. I've got lots of things here to ask you, as you can see. And
Ask me?
Nice blank page there for you. So,
well, hold on. I'm interviewing you. What are you going to ask me?
I'm just taking a piss.
Welcome to our studio.
It's fantastic. I'm so pleased to be here. It's beautiful.
It is so nice not having to get on planes anymore and go and sit in an Airbnb for 2 weeks and record shows.
Beautiful, though, some of those Airbnbs were.
They were. I mean, nobody's listening, but...
No, I've been listening, like I was saying before. You haven't lost me.
No, I think it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
And like you say, the audience is just different. Like the one you did with Ian Burrell, I've been talking about that with all kinds of people, about prisons and the NHS reform. Really fascinating stuff in there, which I think a lot of people just won't know.
It's important stuff. Look, in the UK, I think we have a bigger media problem than the US, like a different one. They've got a hyper-polarized media, but they've got a very strong independent media, I think. I mean, I think we've seen it this week with Rogan. I mean, in the space of a week, he had Trump, JD Vance, Elon Musk, and he's just had Dave Smith back on, I think. I mean, that is a strong independent media that's crushing the numbers of the mainstream. We don't really have that here.
No, and arguably those interviews you just mentioned could easily have made the difference in a few of the swing states.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I listened. I was well impressed with the JD Vance interview.
I haven't listened to that one yet.
It's good. Trump was just funny, just being a douche like he is. But the JD Vance one is fantastic.
I heard his...
You listened to it, didn't you, Con? Oh, I thought you did.
I heard his vice presidential debate.
Yes.
And that's the first time I've really heard him speak at any length. And he was just on fire. You
should listen to the Rogan one.
I will.
But they've got, I mean, it's not just that. I was reading a thing this week that a large part of Trump's strategy was to hit the podcast networks.
Interesting.
So he went on Theo Von's podcast. JD Vance also went on that as well. And that was part of their strategy, is that they can hit millions and millions of, especially young men, but they can hit really good numbers with long form interviews where people get to know them, and it kind of makes sense. And I was thinking, if you did that in the UK, where would you go?
Here.
Well, I would love them to come here. We would love them to come here, but like where would you go? I mean, the leading guy, the rest of his politics guys, they have their one, but they're kind of still establishment people. Yes,
very much so. And I noticed taking a lot of flack this week for an incorrect election call.
Well, I think they had Trump derangement syndrome. I didn't, when all these people come out saying, oh, Kamala's going to crush it, I was like, I'm not sure she is.
Well, short memories as well. Look back at 2016. I remember sitting at my desk reading the New York Times and looking at the percentage chance of Hillary winning that election. It was over 90%. And
hold on, Trump didn't think he was going to win.
No, I don't think he did. I think he was. I think he was honestly surprised when the result came through in 2016. I don't know how people have forgotten that, because 2016 is not a long time ago. But you see that with so many things at the moment. I mean, we've said before, like with the financial crisis. I think one of the few people of my age group and below who will be able to remember what that was like. And so the institutional memory of how to cope with a financial crisis just vanishes from our businesses and our banks incredibly quickly.
Well, I Rory Stewart looked very uncomfortable with it all, and Alistair Campbell obviously cannot stand Trump, but they're still establishment people. That's the issue. I think Konstantin Kissin's doing a fucking amazing job. He's creating a real cut through, and he does it in a way where he doesn't sound crazy. Do you know Konstantin?
Yeah.
So he's done a good job. But there's not much. There isn't a strong enough independent media. GB News, would you consider them independent or mainstream? It's weird.
I'm not quite sure, but perhaps maybe niche. They're still a niche.
And I think they're just, I like some of the people on it, but I feel like they're trying to do basically be UK Fox, right? And I don't think we as a country and as a culture want that necessarily. They've got an appeal, they've got a base, but I don't feel like if there was an election, another election now, where would Kemi, where would Keir go for interviews? Would they do this kind of stuff? And I think that's a problem. I tell you what, Rogan. I really think that Rogan and all those other people have done that's really good. It's definitely inspirational. Is they've created an open place for people to just sit down and talk for 3 hours and just shoot the shit about stuff like that we're not sure about. Like, and I'll give you one example, right? The budget. We just had the budget. I think Labour made a bunch of mistakes. They want to drive growth after taxing us more. They lied in their manifesto, and they're increasing borrowing. And I think it's very obvious the trajectory of where this is going is that our debt is going to grow, productivity isn't growing, and the government's going to increasingly borrow money. So Steve Baker, who I had in here yesterday, was talking about it. He's basically said we've got a currency crisis that's coming. That needs talking about so people understand it publicly. You need to have a place where, the plebs, the peasants, can go and actually understand what's happening, because they're not debating it in Parliament because they're both a part of the problem. The BBC aren't challenging it enough. The Sky isn't. So where's the place that normal people can go and say, everything's fucked, why is this happening?
The only place that happens at the moment in written form is Twitter, obviously. Yes. So I bore people senseless with long threads about the coming sovereign debt crisis.
Yes.
And as soon as you begin to consider these issues in detail, the conclusion is obvious. And obviously, to steal a line from Lynn Alden about trains,
nothing stops it.
Exactly. And it's relatively simple to understand that the only solution out of this is debasing the currency to a point where servicing your debt becomes meaningless, because the actual value of the money that you're having to pay as coupon on your government debt is also meaningless. The only way to get rid of a $3 trillion debt problem is to debase the currency where the price of a bread is $1 trillion, and then happy days.
Is that the only option we have on the table, Freddie? Please tell me of other options. Can we just spend less?
I don't think there's any way out of it at the moment, because the obligations. The interesting thing, the obligations exist, and the coupon on the, and I'm very much not an MMT guy.
Yeah.
The MMT people say that this is all fine because the debt is money that we owe to ourselves, but that doesn't really solve the answer for where do you find the money for the coupon, which is really what interests me. If you had 33 trillion of debt that you never needed to repay, and that bore no coupon, that would kind of be all right in a weird kind of way. The problem is that this debt is not without a cost. That America's, I think it's 35 trillion now, isn't it? Actually?
36, I think. Right?
Oh, okay. Well, it's hard to keep count anyway.
Yeah. What's a trillion between friends?
I know the UK's is about 2 to 3 trillion.
Yeah.
And that comes with a coupon. And where do you find that coupon?
Explain the coupon to people who understand.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a coupon is a shorthand for rate of interest. Yeah. And the reason it's called a coupon is because these things actually used to be physical pieces of paper. And much like stamps, they'd have a perforated thing at the bottom with numbers on them.
Oh, an actual coupon.
An actual coupon, yeah. So it's called a coupon because they were actual coupons back in the day. Do you know what? I said I wouldn't mention films, but this is too good an opportunity to pass by.
Oh, we're going to go down the film rabbit hole again.
No, it shows how old we are.
We split the crowd with that one. Do you remember, people listening, me and Freddie made a Bitcoin show, but we ended up talking about 80s films for about an hour. And they were like, people were like, what the fuck is this bullshit? I came here for Bitcoin. And other people were like, I love this, do more films.
30 seconds, though, on 80s films, and then I'll shut up. I used to explain bearer bonds to people by using a Die Hard analogy, because you remember Alan Rickman, Hans Gruber comes into the building, he's after the bearer bonds.
Yeah.
The great thing about bearer bonds is title to them is transferable by delivery. So at the moment I own this bearer bond, as soon as you hold it, you own it. So that's what's so wonderful about them. Like a banknote is essentially a bearer bond. And it suddenly got to a point where I'd be training young lawyers and none of them had fucking seen Die Hard. So I know.
This happens now. I talk about films that, like, I've been trying to explain mobile phones to people, explaining Alien to them. I'm like, have you seen Alien or Aliens? And they're like, no.
My daughters have now seen Alien.
Do you know what's funny about that? We went on holiday to Thailand years ago, and we got on the plane, and my daughter, I don't know, she was young. Maybe it was Thailand. I can't remember. Anyway, wherever we went, she was like 10. She brings up Aliens, and I was like, you can't watch it. She's like, I want to watch it. I was like, you can't watch that. It's like really fucking scary. Anyway, we put it up. She's just like, I was like, okay, we'll put it up, but there's a bit near the start I have to turn off. When the alien bursts out of the chest. when you watch it now, it's actually quite funny because it's like the effects aren't great, and it's just like this little alien comes out and it's like rah, 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 rah. She was cracking up. I wasn't scared at all. I was terrified.
How
when
old
I
was
watched
she
it.
at the time?
She was about 10, but they're used to modern special effects, so old special effects aren't terrifying.
But the great thing about that film is that so much of it's not actually about special effects. You've got this looming sense of horror. I mean, my daughter was 9. She was watching it sitting on my knee, and she turned around to complain that my heart was beating too loud for her to enjoy the movie. I've seen like 25 times, and I'm still terrified.
So someone told me recently, I was in LA, they said, you know, I don't know what they call the face hugger that sits on the face. They said that's what mobile phones are.
Oh, how interesting.
It's the modern day face hugger.
Oh my God, how horrible.
They are sucking the life out of our faces. There's no good films out anyway, so there's nothing to talk about with films. Film is dead, I think, basically.
I enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine.
I don't know. I get on a plane now and I've either seen the films or I don't want to see the films.
That's true. I've just spent a long time on planes.
Did you watch any films?
I did, but it's an interesting point you make. I didn't want to watch any of the classy ones, so I ended up finding the worst film that was available, and actually thoroughly enjoyed it. It was, I mean, not to badmouth the film. It was the latest King Kong versus Godzilla one. It made no sense, absolute mind rubbish, but it was an interesting way of passing an hour or so.
Anyway, man, you are pretty settled now here in the UK, doing your thing, mixing with the aristocracy and elite.
That's a troubling thing to hear. Isn't it like a Rorschach thing? You know, I'm not mixing with them; they're mixing with me.
Fair, but what I want to get into, okay, look, everything seems a bit fucked.
That's a great summary.
Yeah, everything seems a bit fucked. I know a lot of people who are thinking of leaving the UK.
So do I.
Yeah. I also know people who are struggling with their businesses, and the latest budget has squeezed people a bit more. And I don't see a good direction ahead. I look at the Labour Party and I think they are an embarrassment. I think policy-wise, I brought this up with Steve Baker because I did the research. Nobody on the front bench has had any real-world experience of running a company.
I saw your tweet. Yeah.
That concerned me. So I was asking, I was like, we're talking about economics, and Steve's great. He's like bringing up Hayek and Mises, and he's done his work.
He's very well read.
Yeah, he understands Austrian economics. He brought up like economics in one lesson. This is a guy who understands economics, and he understands the debt crisis that's hanging over us. And I said to him, I said, like, in government, what happens when you talk to other politicians about this? He's like, oh, they don't understand it. I'm like, huh? What do you mean that? He's like, oh, they don't really understand economics. And the few that do, their position is always the same. That can be dealt with by the next government.
Yeah, I mean, not to be too rude about politicians, but I think if you did understand economics, you wouldn't be a politician. You'd be off working for Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan.
But isn't this insane? Our country is being run. We're electing people to run our country and make important decisions that affect the lives of all of us who have no experience of running a company, the reality of it, and don't understand economics.
No, completely right.
So what the fuck are we doing?
A lot of my work, both as a lawyer and then in startups, has been either desperately fighting to keep companies alive, and many, many times over the years, we've been in scenarios where we know how much our cash runway is, and you can see the date that it runs out, and that's before payday. And if you don't do something before then you can't pay your people on Friday.
Which isn't good.
No, and then all kinds of concomitant issues come out of that that you'll know well in connection with directors' duties. At what point must the directors stop trading? And these give you, I don't think I've slept properly for 2 years, to be honest. You wake up in the middle of the night worrying and you can't go back to sleep.
I've lived with it.
Yeah, it's tough. And the problem is, I think if you've been like a political advisor, you read PPE at Oxford, and then you go and be a parliamentary researcher, you join a think tank, and then you run for office. You've never experienced that. You've never known what it's like to look at a balance sheet or a cash flow statement and understand the day on which that money is going to run out. Because if you're in government, of course, the money never runs out. You just make more.
Yeah, but that's the analogy I always give. It's like, you and I, essentially, almost any household kind of runs on a sound money standard, right? In that you have a mortgage. maybe, or rent, and you maybe have car payments and your groceries, and you know what it costs to run your family. You know what you bring in, and if you want something else like a house, you get a loan, but you know if you don't repay it, the house gets taken away from you. There are rules. You don't have a magic money printer up in your bedroom going, well, look, I want to spend some more. But government has this ability just to spend what the fuck they like when they want, and then they push the consequences onto everybody else. And I'm just like, I keep getting frustrated by this. I'm thinking, how can we not have ways to constrain government spending? There must be something we need to do, because we're all getting fucked here.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to look at that historically. I'm sure you did some of this with Steve Baker, but obviously in the past, let's use the example of income tax. Income tax is a relatively recent invention, and along with most other taxes, it was originally raised as a means to pursue wars. And a very interesting point to consider is, and I forget who said this recently, if all of the money for the Iraq War and the Afghan War had to have been raised out of taxes rather than through money creation, those wars would most likely have lasted much less time.
Or not happened.
Or not happened at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. The real key issue is that, you can only tax people so much before they either run out of money themselves or revolt. And so the easier way of funding those kind of wars is through a deficit and or through issuing government debt. And we've talked about this before, that the most modern money is liability money. It's the obligation of someone to repay someone else at some time in the future, which we use as a monetary instrument. And obviously that's fine as long as your credit as an issuer of that debt is good. Like you'll hear people at the Federal Reserve say the dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. And that's great, as long as there's full faith and credit. We're in the middle of an interesting sovereign experiment, seeing how far we can push the extent of that full faith and credit. Because at the point at which external borrowers or external buyers of that debt realize that they're never going to get repaid, or the money they're going to get repaid in will have lost all its value, that's an interesting point to ponder, because that's the moment at which people will stop buying those bonds.
Well, we're at that time where people are questioning it, because
we are definitely.
long term, like 10-year yields are. Con, can you have a look at what the yield is on the 10-year UK? It's gilts, isn't it? Yeah.
Again, interesting fact. That was because they used to be gilt-edged, the little certificates, much like the coupon. Huh. I'm full of fun facts.
but I had this guy just previous to you called Thomas Hogg. He's written this fantastic book called A Place to Call Home.
I've heard of him.
I think his father's Douglas Hogg.
Oh.
But I'm not 100% sure of that. Here we go. Look, they're going up. I mean, hold on. Can I just see, Con, can you just bring that up a bit so I can see the timeline across the bottom?
Well, this is an interesting proxy for how much people trust your government.
That's 1 year. Can you just put that on a 5-year?
Ooh.
When did Liz Truss?
Truss was the spike. It was September 2023, I think.
Yeah. So.
No, was it 23 or was it 22?
Well, either way, we're up there anyway.
Yeah.
So
I think that was Truss.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so people are losing faith in our.
That's interesting, because that shows that we're actually on parity with the Liz Truss budget that supposedly destroyed the economy.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think she had the right ideas, just executed badly.
And very poor media.
Yeah.
I mean, before we get too deep into politics, full disclosure, I've never voted for a party that's won an election. So I can ruse I like around.
I counter-trade you.
Yeah. No, as in none of the parties I voted for have ever won an election. So I can be equally rude about the Conservatives and Labour.
I mean, fuck them all if you ask me. But
I don't have enough genitals. So. Sorry, Pete. You can't tee me up from that.
Yeah, I'm not going to edit that one out. But okay, so like if you think of the voters, the electorate, I think the main issue is these issues are so complex. Trying to get an electorate that understands what they're really voting for is difficult. Also, another thing, somebody said to me once, smoking is like committing suicide slowly.
Well, so are most things we do.
But if you think about that, like ultimately, we don't want people to smoke because you will probably get cancer and die, or have a heart attack and die. But it's committing suicide slowly. It's like you can defer. You can always think, I'll give up tomorrow. I'll give up in a week. It doesn't really matter. This is a problem that I'm going to deal with, decades away, and then decades away happen, and you're there. I kind of think our debt problem's similar.
I agree.
In that we're kind of committing suicide as a country slowly. In that it's like, well, next administration can deal with it. I mean, you only have to go to Argentina to see, like, you can fucking put up with this shit for a long time. It's terrible, and people are impoverished, and the economy doesn't grow, but government's going to get away with it for a long time, because I don't think a lot of people really know what they're voting for.
No, I mean, the evolution isn't. I think the interesting thing is the evolution isn't into a catastrophic end of the world scenario. It's just that over time things just stop working, and humans adapt to an environment where things no longer work. Take our roads, for example. Our potholes have just been getting worse and worse and worse. I'm sure everyone in the UK has experienced that and knows. No one seems able to fix that, but people are just muddling on and getting by. And I've lived in 2 failed states as a kid, and people
adapt.
One of our favorite phrases in Zimbabwe was, "We're going to make a plan." No, the shit is going to hit the fan, but it'll be fine because we'll make a plan. And and you adapt. Revolutions are extraordinarily rare, and I suspect what's going to happen is a simple slow decline. It's weird that you mentioned people leaving the country. Just today, I had a message from a friend who we've been working with on the Bitcoin side of things, and he's moved to Portugal.
Everyone's going to Portugal, man.
Yeah, Obi's there, isn't he?
Yeah. There's a lot of people there. I've looked into it. So what I had a look at in Portugal, if I lived in Portugal for 10 years, what could I buy with the money I save on my tax?
Ooh.
And you end up being able to buy like a gorgeous beach-fronted property, and you get to live in the sunshine. It's like, look, rational decisions. If you can afford to do it, why not? I mean, I get why people leave. Crime's up here. Everyone's miserable. I mean, Sadiq Khan has fucked London. And there's people who are going, I'm going to go and live in the sunshine and pay no tax.
The flip side, though, I think this was an interview with you in American Hodl. I think you have to make a choice, though. Do you do that, or do you stay and try and change? Yeah, do you stay and fight?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, you're here.
I'm here.
Exactly.
I could go tomorrow and live in the sunshine, but no, I want to make a change. I'm just like, how do we do this? And for me, it's just, we have to get enough people in the country educated about economics, educated about government, understand what's really happening, because you get what you vote for.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand what you're voting for, you're going to vote for the same. And so I know full well Labour will either be a 1-term or a 2-term government. If they have an absolute disaster over the next 4 years, which is looking likely they might, Conservatives might win another election and come back into power. And I don't think we're going to see reforms.
No,
I don't think we're going to reform how government spends money. I don't think we're going to see things that are going to lead to significant growth, which will get us out of this shit. So it's just more of the same crap. We're in a managed decline, and it's like, how the fuck do we get out of this?
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines, the world's most responsible currency, the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Well, I think you zoned in on exactly the right question there, which is trying to educate as many people as possible about this. I've already mentioned my long, boring tweets about this kind of stuff, but the takeaway is relatively simple. Government's not going to come and save you, no matter how well-meaning or well-intentioned any of them are. This is a problem that's beyond the scope of any government to fix. Once you realize that the inevitable conclusion of a gigantically indebted government, such as the one we have and such as most of the Western countries have, is currency debasement, then the conclusion is to protect yourself and your family, move as much of your earnings into hard assets that they can't dilute and debase.
How many people have you told this to and they've not done it? We're sat here with Bitcoin at $76,200, which is, by the way, is fucking insane itself.
And, it should be 10 times that.
Well, yeah, but I had it last night. So I was out with somebody last night and trying to explain Bitcoin to them. And they were like, yeah, but won't it just die? And I was like, no, look, mathematically, it has to succeed. It will succeed. But I said, it doesn't even have to be Bitcoin. Just consider scarce assets, gold, Bitcoin, artwork, property. I said, if you have money in your bank, it's going to lose value over time. If that's going to happen, you have to put the money in assets. And Bitcoin is just an asset. But I've had this conversation hundreds of times with people. They've still not done it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously my background was a lawyer in the city. The vast majority of my contemporaries didn't even have a stocks and shares ISA. They would just keep the money in cash, losing between 2 and 12% a year, simply on the rate of inflation. I think there's a huge fear barrier to people taking the leap into looking at other assets that they could buy. And part of that's probably the fault of our education system. None of us were taught about money at school.
Nope.
You and I had to learn this stuff later.
I learned it in my 40s, basically.
Yeah, I think I did as well.
Yeah.
I think late 30s, early 40s.
And I still don't fully understand it. All I know is hold assets.
And, for me, that was after a lifetime of working in the city and dealing with financial engineering as well. But it's educational to look at what managers of money do, and they tend not to hold cash unless it's for a specific purpose. So, everyone's favorite investor, Buffett, when he sells assets to hold cash, it's because he thinks there's going to be a buying opportunity at some point in the future. And he played an absolute blind in the financial crisis. He had a huge cash pile and ended up owning significant chunks of Goldman Sachs as a result.
Yeah. Well, somehow we have to get this across to a lot of people. We have to get. The one I always want to get across to people is get them to watch the Malay WEF presentation.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Where he basically said, "I've seen the future of Europe because I lived it in Argentina. I know where you're heading because you're making the same mistakes we did." And it's getting that across to people like in a neatly packaged way so everybody understands. I think it's a really important thing because I know people can sense something's wrong. I think the speed at which we've gone from Labour being the new hope to realizing actually that they're fucking terrible. I think that's happened in like 100 days.
It's quicker than I've ever seen a government lose faith and confidence.
And I think that's an overall lack of faith and confidence in government as an institution. I think once you go through that cycle, the faster you go through that cycle, the more you realize that government isn't going to save you, like you just said.
That's terribly unfortunate. Going back to something you said a minute or so ago, I think it's really interesting to contrast how the cabinet in the US is constituted with the cabinet in the UK. So Trump is now going around and grabbing, business leaders or Howard Lutnick. He's going to have people with direct experience of running businesses, for example, financial services businesses in the Treasury, or engineers in charge of Department of Transport and so on. So,
by the way, did you see Alex Jones today?
No.
God,
what's
please
happened?
go get Alex Jones. I can't. I assume this is a joke. Is his pitch for a job within Trump's?
You are joking.
No, I think
What's
it's a joke.
be?
You just see this picture. You'll know the one. It's the one with the car. Tell me if you found it, because this fucking killed me.
He can't be the administration.
No, honestly, it's the whole thing's just entertaining. If you don't give a shit, if you're not some raging liberal who's like emotionally broken by Trump winning, just sitting back and watching it's fucking entertaining. Where is it? You found it, Con? Yeah, Alex Jones's page. But yeah, RFK has a role, and people trust RFK. Vivek has a role. People trust Vivek. Tulsi Gabbard's going to have a role. Elon Musk is going to have a role.
Gabbard's an ex-Democrat as well.
Yeah.
They alienated her from the party.
Hold on, they're all ex-Democrats.
Well,
Joe Rogan was a Democrat. Yeah. If the DNC had allowed it, I think RFK could have been the Democrat nominee, and he could have beaten Trump.
Well, they should have had an open primary.
Yeah.
You are joking. I mean, that's a great truck.
Yeah, that's his pitch for press secretary. I don't even know what that gun is. That's like the biggest gun I've ever seen. And his truck. I mean, I like that truck. Fuck,
Can't I do that? But that's a huge mag there.
I don't think Alex Jones, as he tweeted on Thursday, he formally accepts the offer to serve as President Trump's new press secretary. That can't be real. It's got to be. Hold on. That's got to be a joke.
That must be a joke. That's a fantastic vehicle.
But the point is he's getting non-establishment people in to deliver for the people. I think these are also uncorruptible people. I don't see a scenario where these people get corrupted.
They used to do that in Brazil as well. Wasn't Pele Minister of Sport?
I don't know.
I believe that they were. It seems weirdly unique to the UK that we only have people who did PPE at Oxford or worked in a trade union in government.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that is. Would anyone want the job? I say that, and I'm toying with the idea of having a go.
When you're Mayor of Bedford, you are going to walk around it wearing a crown, aren't you?
No. Do you know, I'm not going to do the mayor job. I've looked into it. It's just fucking too much hard work. There's no leeway. Essentially, 80% of your budget's on social care. 76% goes on to social care, so you've got 24% left, and that's getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. I think it's structurally set up for you to fail. I just don't think you can succeed as a mayor. I think it's a terrible job. But I have toyed with the idea of running as MP for Bedford. I've just toyed with it just to try and get in there and throw a few hand grenades around and make a difference.
Yeah,
but I don't know if I'm the right character for it.
Yes, I'm sad to say I don't really know what the solution to that is, because good people tend not to go into politics, and I think even if they do, then the weight of bureaucracy is such that, everything I've heard suggests that the MPs and even the ministers won't make very much difference. There's a gigantic civil service who really run everything, and the turnover of your minister in your department is so high. I've got friends who work at the Foreign Office who are on their 5th or 6th Foreign Secretary. Foreign Secretary comes in, says a few things. Civil servants go, yeah. They'll be gone soon. And we can go back to drinking tea and eating biscuits.
Wasting money.
Yes, although the Foreign Office is beautiful. And if I worked there, I would definitely pretend to be James Bond every day. But
you could have a go at that. We're looking for a Bond at the moment.
I'm too old.
Are you?
Yeah, they need to get 10 years out of you. Also, I can't act. So, that's a small small blocker.
You were going to talk to me about vulture capitalism.
I was. So when we were chatting about private equity and what was our tagline? It's the Bank of England's fault that our rivers are full of shit, I think.
Is that true?
If you follow the breadcrumbs, you can make an argument that. Sorry, that's a bit of a flippant comment. That's summing up a lot of hops, and it's really connected, I think, to something we were just chatting about, which is how money is created, and a lot of these problems go back to the easy creation of money. So I'm setting the scene for anyone who's not in the UK. We've got a huge problem here at the moment in terms of our water companies, which were all privatized in the relatively distant past, and now have no money to spend on actually maintaining the sewage and water system, and as a result tend to dump raw sewage into the rivers, which therefore finds its way down to our beaches.
And is this a new phenomenon based on being private?
It's not necessarily connected with being privatized, and that I think is one of the interesting nuances. It's in connection with the way in which they were privatized.
Okay.
And happy to dig down into that.
Yeah, please do. Tell me.
Cool. So again, setting the scene. So my original profession was as a private equity lawyer, and if people aren't familiar with what private equity is, it is essentially the complete opposite of stocks and shares that are traded on a public market. So if you go and buy Microsoft shares, Microsoft shares are public equity. Private equity is an industry that raises pools of capital to buy companies either from the stock market, so to take them private, or to buy them from individuals, such as, say, if you were to sell one of your businesses to a private equity house, that would be private equity. And back in the 60s and 70s, when this industry was getting started, they were almost like turnaround shops. So they'd buy an underperforming business, they'd identify ways to make it better, and then they would sell it and make a profit on the sale.
Healthy.
Good capitalism. Yeah. And that's exactly what is supposed to happen. the reason I blame the Bank of England, and I do so partly in jest, is because the way a lot of these deals became to be structured over time was actually by buying targets with someone else's money and then using a huge amount of newly created debt to fund the majority of the purchase. And then the worst part of it was that the target you were buying, the water company, let's say, was responsible for repaying that debt.
Right.
So you as the purchaser essentially buy a target with someone else's money and then the target pays, which is brilliant for you if you're the buyer. And it's why so many of the private equity houses made so much money so fast and why it became such an absolutely boom industry. And the key way, and we'll dig down into this a bit more, the key way they were able to structure the deals like that was because the cost of the debt was so low. By cost of debt, I mean how much does it cost you to borrow some money? Now, ordinarily that's set via interest rates. And the lower your interest rate gets, the cheaper your cost of capital, the easier it is for you to borrow the money. And who sets those rates?
Bank of England. So when we were at the near 0% rates, there was no cost of capital.
No, exactly.
And capital was abundant.
Exactly. And that creates a number of different problems. Capital's abundant. It's very cheap for you to borrow money. A lot of people don't understand that when you borrow money, what actually happens is new money is created for you to borrow. It's not like there's not a triangle. Peter puts money into the bank and then the bank lends that money to me. What happens is I go to the bank and ask for a loan, and then the bank creates a loan in my balance sheet out of thin air. So it creates, I say I want to buy a company for $100 million. It creates $100 million, credits that to me, and that's new money that wasn't in the system before. All other money in the system has got less valuable at that moment. And then I need to repay that money to the bank with a coupon, as we were talking about earlier, with a rate of interest, which will be higher than base rate, which is 0, but still incredibly cheap for me to service. When
they pay that back off, do they essentially burn the money?
That's how the money is destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about the private equity industry is it's incredibly sensitive to fluctuations in interest rates. And the point at which it becomes impossible to service that debt is when you run into trouble. I mentioned earlier I did a lot of restructuring. The number of private equity deals that we've had to restructure have been monstrous. So that's the first thing. And, a lot of new money is created. All existing money is diluted. There's a huge drive for you to get involved in this industry because your money's not making any money. Your money's not making any interest in the bank. So leaving it in the bank is stupid. And because of all this borrowing, inflation increases. So there's another driver for you to do something with it.
So, okay. So say I borrow 100 million off the bank for a private equity deal and it collapses and the bank isn't returned its money. They can't destroy that capital at that point because it's already in the system.
Well, the interesting thing is these deals very rarely actually collapse. So what happens is they get restructured.
But even when it's restructured, the debt may never get paid off.
Yes, it's restructured and refinanced. So probably worth looking at a real world example here. So let's look at Thames Water. Everyone in the UK has probably heard of Thames Water, and they'll know it's the water in Thames Water's name is 90% feces now, as far as I can make out.
Great.
So Thames Water was acquired by, I believe, Macquarie Group, and they were bought for I think about 8 billion of equity about 6 billion of equity and about 8 billion of debt. And the way these deals are structured is the private equity house or the bank, and banks are involved in this game as well. They'll create what's called a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, and that will sit underneath the fund, and that will buy the target.
Is that to protect the fund from any deals that go wrong?
There's all kinds of that, but there's all kinds of financial engineering shenanigans that happen as well. And then that SPV is the initial borrower. Oh, here we are. Yeah, that's gigantic.
Yeah. Okay, scroll up. When the company was privatized in 1989, it had no debt.
Yep, there we go.
But over the years, it has borrowed heavily and is currently 14.2 billion in debt by one measure. A large proportion of that was added by Macquarie, an Australian infrastructure bank owned by Thames Water, reaching over 10 billion when the company was sold in 2017. Analysts say Thames Water's current debt amounts to 80% of the value of the business, making it the most heavily indebted in England, Wales water companies. Also, interest payments on more than half of the Thames debt rise with inflation, which has been high in recent years, adding to the firm's woes. Macquarie said they invested billions of pounds in upgrading Thames water, sewage and infrastructure while it owned the company. Is that true or bullshit?
Well, it'll be less than what they took out.
But critics argue that it took billions of pounds out of the company in loans and dividends, which is a share of the... Okay, so what they do is they use debt to buy the company, they leave the debt in the company, and then they extract the value out.
It's even worse than that.
Oh, God.
So we've got the special purpose vehicle.
Yeah.
And then that's going to be one that buys the target. And the special purpose vehicle is funded usually by a combination of debt and equity. So a classic deal, you'd put maybe 10% equity in and borrow 90% from the bank.
Okay.
And then the bank wants security for that money that it borrows. So the bank takes security over all the business and assets underneath the SPV. And that includes, so the bank has security over all the Thames Water business, basically. And it also takes security over the shares in the SPV.
Okay.
Now, remember, the SPV, as you rightly said, is remote from the fund. So if anything goes wrong, the fund can sever that and they can walk away without any liability. Quite often, the money that's put into the SPV, cleverly, is done not in the form of equity, but in the form of loan notes. Now, I tend to get frustrated by it because a lot of people say the shareholders have been paid dividends. Dividends are actually quite difficult to pay out of a company. You'll know as a business owner, you can only pay them out of realized profits available for distribution.
Yeah.
But loan notes are an obligation that you need to pay in the ordinary course. So if you're a private equity house, you fund your special purpose vehicle via loan notes, and you can put a coupon of 12 to 20% on those loan notes. And then that obligation is pushed down into the operating business. And this is the thing that really irks me about the business model. Because as soon as you saw on the screen there that Connor pulled up, initially that Thames Water had no debt. The only reason it has debt now is not because it's borrowed recklessly, but because it's been bought by a private equity house that has imposed those debts on it as part of the acquisition structure, which, when you think about it, is a monstrous thing to do. And I can reel off any number of businesses to which this has happened. Pizza Express, another good example, acquired in 2006 by a fund called CVC.
Yeah, no, CVC.
No, Cinven. Cinven bought them. And since then, the majority of Pizza Express's cash flow has gone to servicing the endlessly recycled and refinanced debt. And these businesses that are paying a 12 to 20% coupon in loan notes to their acquirers, and then also pay money to the SPV so they can pay back the acquisition debt, don't have any money to invest to improve their services, to give their staff pay rises, in the case of Thames Water, to make sure that the sewage system is working properly.
It's parasitic.
It is.
It is a way to extract the value out of an asset that has value.
It is.
Hold on, isn't this what happened with Manchester United? They were bought.
They were bought by the Glazers. Yeah.
And a lot of the complaints at Manchester United has been with the state of the ground, Old Trafford, that there's been no investment in the infrastructure and that the ground is essentially a shithole and falling apart, and because it's had to service the debts.
Yeah. I worked on the deal for Liverpool Football Club in 2008, late 2007. Actually, there's a photo of me holding the Liverpool Club share certificate.
That was the one with Gillette. Yeah. Which, by the way, John Henry played a masterclass from acquiring Liverpool for what I think, did he get it for like a couple 100 million, 300 million?
It wasn't very much.
And it's worth billions now. Yeah, masterclass. But so basically this is a predatory practice to extract value from things of high value.
Unfortunately, that seems to be what it's become.
What's the breaking point for something like that? And how does the private equity... So the private equity firm essentially takes control by putting the debt. They've borrowed money to...
Well, the interesting thing is the private equity house is not the borrower. The borrower is your special purpose vehicle.
Yeah.
And then the obligations are pushed. So there's a term called obligor, which means a person or a company that's responsible for repayment, basically. And the obligor circle is SPV and all of the business. So the clever thing is the private equity house has the benefit, but they don't have any of the downside because that all sits in the acquired group.
So who did they buy Thames Water from at that point when it went?
I think it was already in private hands at that time.
So it was already in private hands.
Yeah.
Okay. At the point of privatization, by the way, from being held by the government, does the government is the government essentially selling it to people?
Yes.
Okay, fine. And so it's already in private hands. Another private equity, they look at Thames Water and they say, they look at the income. They say, oh, this is generating billions. This has value. There's value to extract. Mm-hmm. So they're not looking in it to buy it because they think they can grow it and grow the profits and therefore pay a dividend, because that's a lot of work and that's expensive. But they can do it a different way. They can essentially indebt it and extract the value through interest on that debt, which is way above standard interest rates. Because if an interest rate's at 4% and they're charging 20%, that's how they extract it. Oh, here we go. So the entire water and waste sector was privatised 34 years ago under the late Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government for $7.6 billion. At the time, Margaret Thatcher wrote off the industry's $5 billion debt, leaving companies with a clean slate, and gave them $1.5 billion in public money. So that sounds like almost like net neutral.
Yeah.
Okay. So these private equity houses they found a methodology for extracting value from high value private companies. When does it break? What's the breaking point for the SPV, or does it not matter?
Weirdly, in some ways, it doesn't. You can keep the process going almost indefinitely. So infrastructure assets are quite a good area to look at, because pension funds, for example, invest in a lot of these things as well. Pension funds were investing in electricity utilities, in communications, in care homes. So either societal infrastructure businesses like care homes or utilities like water and electricity, those tend to have relatively predictable income cash flows. And so it's easy for those investors to model what kind of cash flow they're going to get. And they can calculate what kind of coupon those businesses can bear. And the wonderful thing is, if anything goes wrong, then you call your restructuring team. The businesses are too critical to collapse, so that these debts will almost inevitably be restructured. And that was what I used to do for bread and butter. You may have heard of a debt for equity swap. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who hasn't, what ordinarily happens here is, at some point, the directors of the company, their duties will shift from being owed towards the shareholders to being owed to the creditors. And ordinarily that's at the point of insolvency. When insolvency happens, it doesn't mean the business is dead. It just means you call in insolvency practitioners, and they look at all of the contracts and the business as a whole, and they try to restructure it to save it. And on the plus side, English insolvency law has come on in leaps and bounds over the last 10 years. It's all about trying to save the business and turn it into something viable again. At this point, shareholder value basically gets wiped out. So the administrator will be talking to the debt holders, who will listen, and they will vote together in blocks depending on how much debt they hold and how it's stratified. We don't need to go into the details, but you tend to have different layers of debt, junior, senior, mezzanine debt. And each group will have different portions and different exposure. And then you'll have different creditor meetings. And then at some point, if all goes well, you have what's called a scheme of arrangement, for example. And then the administrators will either manage to sell the business to a new buyer, and quite often the shares will be sold for £1, and the business will be sold for the value of the debt. And or in a debt for equity swap, the debt holders may say, okay, in exchange for all of our debt, we're going to swap that into shares. You'll write off the debt, and in return, we'll get shares in a new co.
Okay.
And then you take the new co free and clear of debt. Unfortunately, what ordinarily happens is you don't get the new co free and clear of new debt. There's a refinancing. Some of the terms of the debt are changed. You may not even go down the debt for equity swap at all. The lenders may agree to take a haircut, which is, get repaid 50% of what they're owed, and so on and so forth. And then the process starts again.
It's like they're keeping these companies on life support.
Oh, yeah.
It's like taking a healthy body, poisoning it, but then just keeping it on life support.
Well, we call them zombie companies.
Yeah. And in doing that, if you're extracting if you figured out the maximum value you can extract, you are going to minimize what you're going to be able to put into, like you said, pay rises. But the infrastructure work that is required, they've said they've done billions of infrastructure work, but clearly not enough.
Yeah, I pulled up a picture earlier. That was the number of sewage flows on January the 3rd.
Jesus, can we get that up on the screen?
It's a tweet.
It's a tweet from Layla Moran, Connor, at Layla Moran, but it was January 3rd.
Those were active sewage discharges into the rivers.
I mean, for the camera, that's a fuckload. But I don't know what's normal. You almost want to see what it was pre their ownership. Okay, so we're basically poisoning our rivers, these private equity vultures.
Unfortunately, we are at the moment. And the weird thing is that I feel very conflicted about this because, as a
free market
capitalist, there's nothing inherently wrong morally with buying companies and looking to make profit from selling them. What is wrong is the extent to which it happened.
But Alan Farrington says this isn't a capital. We don't live under capitalism. You can't have government fiat and capitalism in the same system. You can only do this in a government system which allows for the misallocation of capital.
That's the problem in a nutshell. Have you read Steven Pinker's Blank Slate?
No, but I'm going to.
It's very interesting.
Let me go and get this ordered.
So he talks about cheaters in a population. So in populations of people, how many cheats can an honest population support? That book is all around a biological basis for morality. In the absence.
Clean slate.
Yeah, the Blank Slate.
The Blank Slate.
I think some of his theories may have been slightly discredited now, but it's still an interesting read.
Here we go. Right, I'm going to buy that. Oh. Okay,
so one of my pet theories is that easy monetary policy allows a population to sustain a higher number of cheaters than would ordinarily be possible. It allows unproductive or misallocated uses of capital to flourish. It allows things like Thames Water to proliferate. And, I'd probably go as far as saying that it allows things like the buy-to-let market to become far too predominant and diseased. You were talking earlier about how do we communicate these ideas to regular people, and the housing market and how impossible it is for anyone to save up enough money to buy a house is something that everyone is conscious of. And in no small part, that is down to the Bank of England's interest. Personally, I think interest rates should be much, much, much higher than they currently are.
Well, this is the thing. When interest rates went up, it was a problem for people. It was a problem for me. My mortgage went up. It shot up. A lot of people's. But what I was trying to get across to people was like, but these rates are kind of normal. And you want this, but you also want interest. You want higher interest rates because you want there to be an incentive to save money.
Yes.
Like I remember my parents used to be able to put money in the bank and save it. And they could save it knowing they get an interest and hopefully know they weren't being debased. Now we're at the point where I tell the story of when I went to Argentina. I went for dinner on the first night with a bunch of guys. And one guy said, we all have two jobs. We have our normal job, 30% of our time. We're FDs. We're trying to manage our money. We're trying to say, okay, I've been paid my pesos now. Where am I going to put it? How do I get some dollars? How do I get some US equities? Where can I put it so it doesn't just melt away? We're at the early stages of that here, in that I know, say I had 10 grand, there's no point leaving that as cash in the bank. My interest rates are still low and they're not outpacing inflation. And so I have to do a small FD job myself. I don't think most other people can or do or know how it works. And that is a problem.
It is. Either you go out and you spend your money immediately because it's evaporating, or, maybe you don't have enough anyway. Sorry.
I was going to say, sorry, no, you finish the thought and then I'll...
No.
Basically, but this feels like it should be... It feels criminal, even though it's not. It feels like we've allowed for the financial engineer and to allow parasites to suck the value out of important good companies and allow for the fiat kind of destruction of companies for the sake of people to extract profits who probably think they're really clever and probably have got nice cars and nice houses and yachts and think I'm pretty fucking clever, but it's kind of evil.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't blame private equity houses for doing this any more than I blame a lion for killing and eating a zebra. Mm-hmm. It's functionally what they do. Their job
they
is...
They must know they are... It's like asset stripping in a way.
It is, but I tend to be... I think it's a reprehensible practice, but I tend to be a bit more... I don't know, maybe nuanced about being too cross about it, because I genuinely don't think it's... Therefore, they are responding as any organism would to the environment in which they operate. So the environment in which they operate was one in which there were very low yields of interest in bank accounts. Money was very cheap because of the zero interest rate policies. They had an obligation to their own investors to do something with the money. So the drive to acquire assets isn't just from the private equity investors themselves. They themselves have investors, LPs, limited partners who want a return on their money. And because of each of these factors, they're in an environment where if they don't deploy the capital, it's just evaporating. And lots of other people are borrowing as well. So money's being diluted left, right, and center. So they're driven to do as much as they can to acquire assets in as clever a way as possible and to maximize the coupon they pull out of those companies, partly for their own fiduciary duties to their own investors at the top. So, if you put any organism into an environment, it will adapt to that environment, and this is what's happened. The problem is this comes down to rate setting. If you mentioned your parents' interest rates in the 70s and 80s were far, I think they hit 15, 16% in the 70s.
Yeah, but they were tough times.
They were. But if you look over a long time period, a rate of interest at about 5% is relatively normal. And that is probably about where you are in terms of a decent return on money, which hopefully should be a couple of points above inflation. But at the same time, it's cheap enough for you to borrow to buy a house.
But I think certainly the previous administration, the Conservative one, and Labour now, I think they would love interest rates to get back below 2%,
they would.
1%, because of their own debt they're having to service.
Yeah, exactly. And as soon as interest rates get low, then all of this nonsense starts again. You have another private equity boom. You have companies being bought. I mean, fucking hell. I remember the two booms I've worked through before. Is this public or not? Okay, I won't name any names. I worked for a big private equity house, and we acquired a series of beer companies. Mm-hmm. I can't remember whether this is public or not. So okay. No names. Team of 4 at the private equity house, and we flipped it a year later, sold to a trade buyer, and they made $1 billion of profit in 10 months.
What?
Absolutely nuts. And that was simply through, they hadn't improved the business. They hadn't done anything to make the business better. They'd barely finished buying it before they commenced the sale process. And that was simply because of the absolute skyrocketing asset prices. It's like people who think they're clever because they made money from housing,
or think they're clever because they bought Bitcoin.
Well, I don't own any Bitcoin, so I'm clearly the biggest idiot in the room. So
did you lose it in a Rolls Royce accident? What are the conversations happening around this? Like, are there conversations people saying, "Look, we need to fix this. This is fucked. This is bad. This is not good for society"?
Periodically, you get people who say the private equity industry is bad. Honestly, in its purest form, I don't think the private equity industry is bad. I'd like a group of very clever, driven, committed people who want to buy businesses and improve them.
Yeah, but they're buying businesses and not improving them.
Yes, I mean that's the fundamental flaw in that design. So,
and even if we had high interest rates, couldn't they still do this anyway? If the cost of capital is 5-6%, couldn't they just loan note it higher than that anyway? They
could, but the key thing is that it would be harder to service with the cash flow coming out of the business at that point. Right. So a business like Pizza Express, for example, or Prezzo, I know. One of the reasons that you don't see many Prezzos anymore is because they went through a restructuring, which was catastrophic and ended up in the closure of a lot of the chains. Pound World, I worked on the Pound World transaction. That's no longer on the high street. That went through an unsuccessful restructuring after a private equity acquisition.
Well, with inflation, there's not many things you can sell for £1 these days.
Well, exactly. It'd be like £10 world, wouldn't it? Yeah, they would have had to rename that as part of the rebranding.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just another thing. Yeah, along the list of things which are problems now in the current world we live in, where all I recognise is that it's hard for people to create businesses. It's hard for people to cover the cost of living. I know people who are middle class with 2 incomes coming in, and they've got no money left at the end of the month. They cannot get through all the costs of life. And I'm just like, everything trajectory wise is going in the wrong direction, Freddie. And I'm like, we've got to fix this somehow. And I put all the blame at the door of government. And I say government, and I won't pick a party because they're all fucking doing the same. Conservatives ran a shit show for 14 years. They've been replaced by a Labour shit show, who will either be a second-term shit show or be replaced by another Conservative shit show. It's going to be continual increase in the debt, continual debasement, and a continual fracturing of our society. And it's fucking heartbreaking.
It is.
I've sworn a lot today.
Are we allowed to swear on your new show?
Yeah.
Okay, because are we allowed to drink whiskey on your new show?
We can drink whiskey.
Okay, well, it's the afternoon now, and I did stop in at Milroy's on the way here, so we should...
You always do this to me.
Sorry, it's a tradition.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Come on.
But
Maybe
we can drink this and talk about solutions rather than problems.
This was meant to be for water. What have you bought?
Well,
this is a bourbon.
Well, remember we had the burnt ends last time.
Yeah, that was amazing. I think I've still got some. No, we finished it. So
we had a chat. I had a chat with a very nice man in Milroy's who I described the burnt ends to him, and he recommended this to me. He's from Utah.
Okay.
And it's a mix of rye whiskey, bourbon, and malt and blended Scotch.
So it's everything.
Yeah. So
let's go. Not too much. I've got to drive at the other end.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I'm on the train, so I'll just have the rest.
You can just, yeah.
Would you like any, gents? Oh,
fucking hell. No. Oh, cheers.
Oh, cheers.
Cheers. It's got a real peaty malt whiskey taste to it.
That's nice. It's also 46%.
I mean, look, I'm thinking a lot about solutions. I started writing in my limited capacity. I started a Substack just to try and develop my own thoughts. I find it very hard to come to firm conclusions. But what I do know is that we need a very public and open and honest debate about what is broken within our government, our media, and our financial system. It has to be... Everything needs to be on the table, and it needs to be broadly known and understood.
Yeah.
You know, we've just had that Labour budget, and it's broadly known and understood that they have lied. Basically, if you compare to what they said in their manifesto, they've lied to us. And that's worked. We've got that across. People understand. Okay. But how do we get a broad understanding in the electorate about how the economy works, how money works, how government works, so we know we're being fleeced? And how do we get the electorate to care enough to be revolutionary about it, to have a large and powerful enough voice to say, no fucking more, we're not taking this anymore? Because I think it exists. I think people are feeling it, and I think people are angry, but I don't think they know why they're angry because they can't figure out where the problem is.
It's that line in the Matrix, isn't it? You know there's something wrong with the world, like a splinter in your brain driving you mad. I think you're completely right. People feel angry, they feel sad, they feel unable. They feel unable. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Is it blocking my face? Cheers, God.
You don't want to miss Peter's face.
Just see my body wrapping around it.
Sorry about that, Peter.
Right.
I think so it's a question, I think, of joining those dots. And I don't think it's something that we can fix very easily because these issues are complex. You know, everything that we've been chatting about here, a lot of professionals who work in the city don't understand how a private equity deal is structured. They won't understand the difference between a coupon and a dividend. They won't understand, why is Thames Billion 15 billion in debt?
Yeah.
And the explanation takes 10 or 15 minutes, and none of us have that time.
So what are the basics? I think of... I mean, I haven't voted the last 2 or 3 elections, right? Because I refuse to vote for decline, and every party is out there is only offering decline. I wasn't going to vote for Conservatives because they were terrible, but I could see this growing support for Labour. It was pretty obvious they were going to win the election, even though it wasn't that convincing, because I think people had this belief that, Labour will come in and fix, the Conservatives' mistakes and they'll improve this country. I knew they wouldn't, because I knew policy-wise it would be more tax and more borrowing. So I just objectively knew this would lead to more decline. How do we get it so everybody understands what is going to lead to more decline, that we're in managed decline, and that we need something fundamentally different?
I mean, doing what you're doing here is important. It's fundamentally important that people understand how money is created, how money is destroyed, where it comes from, where it goes, because that affects everyone. And money is crucially important to understand. And simply getting the message that, have you...
Voter turnout, general election, and this is interesting. Look at that, voter turnout down to 60%. So the lowest, 57.2%. I mean, is that during World War I?
Right at the end, 1918, the World War ended.
Okay, so at the end of World War I, well,
half of the voters were dead at that point.
Well, yeah, but that would have been percentage of a vote. Hold on, were women allowed to vote at that point? Is that included?
No, 1920s. So when we got the war after the vote after the war.
Okay, so we had a massive. So highest was in the 50s, 83.9%. Even 1997, 77.7%. Was that the start of Labour? I can't remember.
97 was when Blair came in first.
Blair came in, yeah, and then 2001.
Second Blair election.
Yeah. So that was pretty much an all-time low, apart from 1918, and we're back down to that. 60% voter turnout's really low.
It is.
That's really low.
Well, maybe people are beginning to realise that voting doesn't fix things.
I mean, somebody said to me, they said, the role of democracy, democracy has what role? It enables you to get rid of a terrible party peacefully. That's it.
I completely agree. It's how weird. Maybe I'd seen that somewhere. I defined democracy recently as, can you ensure that you have a transition of power without violence?
Yeah, that's exactly what that was. Because, if you have an authoritarian regime, it requires violence to get rid of them. Like, if you want rid of Maduro in Venezuela, it's going to require a violent revolution. There's no peaceful handover of power. In the UK, Conservatives were terrible. The way we get rid of them is that enough people are pissed off to vote and get rid of them. But that's democracy should do more than that.
Well, that's a positive takeaway. So I think we've already said we need to try, and collectively all of us need to try and communicate as much and as succinctly as we can the problems with the way that money is created, moved around, and controlled in our system. A positive is that we still live in a country where you can have a peaceful transition of power without violence. Mm-hmm. And I think if as part of certainly the first thing that we've mentioned, we can try and encourage whoever comes into power to get expert. I know everyone is sick of experts, but it's important to get expert advice on important things that they don't necessarily themselves understand. As you said earlier, no one on the front bench has run a business and understands the kind of issues that we were talking about in
I think there's two within the Conservative Party.
Well, that's a start. Out of two out of 200.
I almost feel like there needs to be a test. You have to have if you want to drive a car, you have to pass a driving test. And, if you want to serve alcohol, you have to have a license, and you have to go through certain training to understand the responsibilities of selling alcohol. And if you want to be, I don't know, a hairdresser, you have to learn how to cut hair. There doesn't seem to be anything that stops anyone going into politics, which is a good thing because you get representation of the people. But if you're making decisions that are affecting every business in the country and every person in the country, you should at least have some kind of minimal qualifications that you understand the impact of the decisions you're making. So, for example, the rise in national insurance, which they said, it's a tax on business, it's not a tax on working people. But every single tax is a tax on working
people. Feeds through, doesn't it? Ultimately, you and I pay. Yeah. To be honest, I would prefer to see someone who'd run a nail bar or a string of nail bars as an MP than I would to see a parliamentary researcher and a think tank person. 1,000,000%. Because they've run a business. Yeah. They've gone to work every day, they've paid their bills, they've paid their staff, they've looked at their cash flow, and they've looked at their P&L, and they know what the difficulty they're dealing with. And by the way, as somebody who now runs local businesses, I know how many of the problems are caused by government, which is high taxation, high red tape. Well, I mean, I return frequently to HS2, how to spend 50 billion on not building a railway. If they'd asked me, I would have not built a railway for just $1 billion.
What the fuck have they spent 50 billion? Is it all consultants?
It's consultants, it's planning, it's planning applications, it's some of it's land purchases in the way. Most of it's red tape. Did you read the story this week about the bat sanctuary?
Oh, they spent 100 million on a shed. Is that true?
I think it actually is.
How does a shed cost 100 million?
Bats are very, very difficult in terms of our planning restrictions. You have to call out a Batman and not the good kind that we would like. If they find bats in your house, you can't put a. Oh, is this the shed? Wonderful.
I mean, it looks quite good. Okay,
It does look like a bat. It looks like a freaking bat cave, doesn't it?
The cost of a bat shed to protect a species in woodland along the new HS2 high-speed line has risen to more than 100 million. The 1 kilometre long mesh structure will be built where the London-Birmingham high-speed train line emerges from a tunnel in Buckinghamshire to protect a colony of Bechstein's bats, described as a blot on the landscape built with no evidence that bats were at risk from the trains. So John Thompson said, this shed, you're not going to believe this, cost more than 100 million. Thompson questioned an industry conference about the huge cost of building HS2. And do you know what I think this is? I think this is mainly corruption. I think this
interesting.
I just think it's like
local council planning.
Yeah, but like somebody's getting a job here where they can set a price. Which, how does that cost 100 million? Can you scroll up again, Connor? It doesn't even look like a shed. It just looks like a.
You and I could offer like 2 million for that, and we could put that up in a weekend.
I bet we could.
Prefab.
By the way, 8,000 different permits required along the route. This is just bureaucracy and red tape. By the way, have you ever seen the video of bats in a nightclub?
No, like Blade.
No, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Go to YouTube, Connor, and search for bats goth nightclub and see if this works. What somebody's done, they've flipped the camera upside down and they've played goth music and they've got bats there. And it's the fucking greatest video I think I've ever seen. Yeah, here it is.
Oh my
Hanging
God.
bats filled outside. If you've got the music,
you
need the music.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Isn't it the greatest? Look. It's a goth nightclub. It kills me. That kills me every time. It looks like the kind of club I used to go to in the 90s. But that's the point. So there is no... Okay, imagine I owned a bunch of farmland and you came to me and you're like, Pete, I want to build a train line through there. I'm like, okay, you can build it, but I want you to protect the bats. You wouldn't spend 100 million building a shed.
No.
You wouldn't build that.
No, you wouldn't build a railway. I mean, I was talking on to Stephen Levery yesterday, and one of the things I said was, Britain is a very ossified country. It's very, very hard to do anything or to change anything or to build anything here. And that was in the context of building a Bitcoin business or getting the FCA to pay attention to a new industry. But it applies equally to planning as well. I live in a Victorian house. We've got original Victorian windows. I can't afford to put in the kind of double glazing that would be acceptable to the local council because we live in a conservation area. So
what's double glazing got to do with conservation?
Well, it's because the windows need to look exactly the same from the outside as they currently do, and in order to do that, each window will cost like £20,000 to £30,000, and I can't afford that. So we're just leaking heat out of the windows.
Do you know about the story about the wheelchair ramp at my house?
I've heard. Yeah. Have you now removed it?
Yeah, of course we moved it. We moved it the day we moved in because nobody's been to my house in a wheelchair. And there's a gravel track. For anyone listening, I bought a house, and one of the planning rules was the house had to have a wheelchair ramp for it to be signed off. But as soon as it's signed off, you can remove the wheelchair ramp. So essentially, wheelchair ramps are being built, made, and then got rid of because there's no need for it.
That's a great business. Do you think someone's recycling them?
I have no idea. But there's so many things like that you come across. Like me and Connor, when did we first identify that Coffee Republic for our coffee shop? Was it last season? Before the summer?
There were about 10 different options in the company.
It was about April or May we looked at it first. So, okay, this coffee shop. I want to build a coffee shop. We found a location. So like, great, we want it. So we've made an offer for the lease. We've been approved, but we are not going to get the keys to even do our refurb now until maybe beginning of December. And some of it's, the landlord themselves having to get work done, and there was asbestos, so that had to get removed. Yeah, I don't understand that.
Were there any bats?
Were there any bats? There were no bats.
Don't ask.
But the amount of things like loops. So we had to get a visit from the police and the local council and the environmental noise department, whatever. All had to have a joint meeting to come and see it. It's a cafe.
Good grief.
It's a fucking cafe. And so the amount of like loops we're having to jump through, and then add to that, when we open up, we're going to have to pay business rates, which is a lot. And all the new regulation relating to employment laws, it's going to make this is a really, really hard business to make a profit from.
Yeah, how on earth do you even begin to break even at that point?
Well, I think that's the point. I think you just about break even. I think that's the problem with town centres. They're full of shops either just breaking even or going bust. Someone will open a shop, ambitious, they've got a great idea, and then 3-6 months in, it's
breaks
fine.
my heart when I see that.
Yeah, but it's fine. But Starbucks are fine, and Costa's are fine, Subway's are fine, and McDonald's are fine because they have a machine that knows how to work these things. But independent individuals who are like, I have an idea, I want to open a florist, I want to open a record shop, and some of them succeed, but there's so many empty shops, and I know there's good, young, enthusiastic people who would love to open a business, but the main barriers are, one, access to capital, of course, because it costs money to do this. But the red tape, the bureaucracy, and the taxation just makes a lot of businesses prohibitive that could work. And what would a town centre look like without business rates? With all the shops open, it'd be a place you want to go. You'd want to walk around it. You'd go to a cafe, have some lunch. You'd go to a florist, buy some flowers. You would go to a record shop. Instead, what you've got is our Bedford High Street is basically charity shops, little mini markets, betting shops, and crackheads with the odd nice little business around it. The aesthetics of the town centre is fucked because it's too hard to build a business there. It's not that there aren't people who want to build a business. It's just too hard. My
daughter wants to design shoes and sell them in a shop, and I haven't got the heart to tell her that that's not going to happen here for all of the reasons you've just described. Yeah. She would be better off selling crack to the crackheads and not having the costs of a premises to cover. There
is a regular and consistent customer base there. And do you know what? That's the other worst thing about it is our town centre is basically plagued very, very, look, I am sympathetic to addiction. I've had addiction, but our town centre is plagued by a very small group of highly addicted drug addicts who are regularly wandering around the town, going in, stealing, selling those items and going to feed their habits. It's terrible. It's awful, but it's also awful for the people running the shops. There's a radio system now in Bedford where different shops have a radio network to say so-and-so's just come in and robbed our shop, keep an eye out.
Well, that's not being enforced anymore either. Well, it's a huge problem now. Below a certain level, the police don't get involved. Yeah. And so that's another, in fact, that's another cost to businesses because law enforcement is not policing that kind of regular shoplifting theft, and people are terrified to fucking try and stop these people when they come into the shops.
So where's the business rates money going? Because the business rates money is meant to be for the town centre to support the businesses. And it's not now. It's clearly the business rates are to fund government. They're not to fund or support the town centre. And this is the whole problem with taxation now. I just see it as there is a pot of money the government needs, and it's fed by all these different taxes, and they don't have enough and they borrow more. It's not like, fuel duty is for the roads. It's not like NI is for the health service.
It's not segregated. You need to take one for the team and go in and have a proper look at the books. Perhaps that's the answer. Maybe
the local council's books.
Yeah, go in.
I mean, they're public. They're public. It's the majority is going into social care,
right?
And it's mandated. They have to do it. And look, some of this is really fucking important. Child social care is important. There's a lot of kids living in difficult circumstances. But then, how many of them are living in difficult circumstances downstream from the economic problems of the government? Of course. How many of them are parents who've lost their jobs or they've had a business hasn't worked out and they've turned to drink or drugs? Yeah. How many are living in abusive situations because of stress? Not giving people an excuse for abusive because you shouldn't. If you are, you're a cunt. But how many of these things are downstream from the economic problems?
You can understand something without excusing it.
Yeah. Like how much of these problems, how much of Here it is. Adult social services is 37% of our budget. Children's service 25.3%. Council
is
support.
this for Bedford?
Yes, this is for Bedford. Bedfordshire. Council support services 13.3%. Housing benefit 1.2%. Okay.
Of course, that's relatively low. I wouldn't have guessed that was
Well, I want to see all that over time, but it's left
nearly 40% on adult social services.
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
with 1.7% now on leisure and libraries.
Well, what on earth's going into that? I mean, I've mentioned the Ian Burrell interview a couple of times,
Yeah.
but one of my takeaways from that I thought was really fascinating was how our NHS system is really geared for a world that doesn't exist anymore, and how can we turn it into a more preventative system rather than a reactive system. It seems to be geared for something where people go in needing triage for an industrial accident, whereas so much of it, I'm sure there must be possible to reduce that adult services spend if you encourage people to, if people exercise and eat well and don't continuously drink in the middle of the day.
But the one that depresses me there is libraries and leisure.
That's so sad, isn't it?
1.7% on libraries and leisure.
I loved my local library when I was a kid.
Transport, roads and parking 3.7%. I want to know what the makeup of that is. What's going into, children's services, you can't take that away. But what is adult social services? How much is it is actually truly necessary, and how much of it is downstream of the economic problems?
I mean, I'm just a mean bastard, and adults should look after themselves if they're
Well, I think there's probably some complexity in there. So, for example, you might have support for women's refuges. That's a necessary thing.
Does that include care for the elderly and
possibly
infirm?
as well?
Okay.
And which is a growing number because we have an aging population.
Oh, well, a lot of them are owned by private equity and hedge funds now, by the way.
It's good money.
There is good money.
Yeah.
And the local council has to, interestingly, maybe that's a nice way of closing the circle here. I've worked in a couple of care homes deals, and quite a few of them ended up going bust. The local council has to pay you. So if you own the care homes and the land that the care homes are on, and you've got a relatively guaranteed income stream from the local council for all the people they deliver to your care.
Well, it's mandated. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's 76%.
Good grief.
Yeah, in total. And so, there's short-term solutions, which I think a better tax system. I found out today our tax code is 17,000 pages long. The Hong Kong tax code is 256 pages.
Good grief.
Yeah, it's complex.
17,000 pages.
17,000.
I guarantee you not a single person has read all of those.
Well, this was what Thomas was saying. There's a huge misallocation of capital, like financial capital, time, and mental resources going into just tax compliance because it's so complex. If you're complying with PAYE, complying with VAT, complying with capital gains, as a business, how much money are you spending with your accountants? Across my 4 businesses, I'm spending nearly $100,000 a year with accountants.
I'm not surprised.
And the accountant's job is to make sure I pay the right amount of tax.
At Ledden, we've built the best Bitcoin-backed loan platform in the world. Proven, trusted, growing. Ledden's proven track record speaks for itself. Visit ledden.io/Mr. Obnoxious to get started. Ledden, there is no second best. Ledden is not regulated in the United Kingdom. Any credit products or virtual asset services provided by Ledden are not subject to UK regulatory protections. Please consider the risks associated with virtual assets and consult a financial advisor before making any decisions.
Have you seen Donald Rumsfeld's letters he used to send to the IRS every year?
No.
It's worth pulling these up. They're very funny. Just one page. He'd say, dear IRS, here's my tax return. I've completed it to the best of my ability. I have to confess that I do not understand a single word of any of the things that you've asked me to do. There may be mistakes in my tax return, for which I apologise.
You go to jail for that, though.
Well, no, exactly. It's worth having a look at those. It's very funny.
But there are things that can be sorted in the short term. Like I say, a simplification of the tax code, trying to get some more efficiency in government.
Trying to get more people in government who have experience of what it's like not to be a politician. I think that would be a really useful first step. And we're beginning to see some of that in the United States at the moment with Trump's new cabinet. I'm a bit of a bleeding heart liberal myself, but I can see the value in having people in your cabinet who have experience in the real world.
Of course.
And whatever party you're from, that would be an enormously useful first step. And I was going to mention, when you were talking earlier, Timpson, I think I'm a bit of a fan of his. He's from the family who run the Timpson shoe shops. And one of their big things is rehabilitation of prisoners. And I really liked which interview was it that you did recently? The purpose. Oh, it was Ian again. The purpose of prison reform should be to make someone a good neighbour.
I mean, in the US, it's called the Department of Corrections.
Yeah, it was great. I think that's quite laudable. You don't want going to prison to be effectively the end of someone's life.
But the problem with the US is this is where you get into the issues of privatization of prisons. Is that it's profitable to keep people in jail.
Oh God.
Yeah, there are whole. So if you go into the US, you can drive around. You can go to towns where the prison is the main employer, and so what happens is the prison guard lobbyists. They lobby to prevent changes in laws. So they're the ones who lobbied against change in cannabis laws. I mean, it's ludicrous to send somebody to jail. I did not know that. Yeah, and they lobby because if you have prison reform and you gut the prison of prisoners, you're going to gut that town of jobs.
Oh Christ!
Yeah, so it's a real problem. But
that's really interesting in terms of drug legalization, because I'm a relative fan of the idea that a lot of lives would probably be saved if you legalized and regulated drugs rather than try to fight them in the way that we currently do.
Well, I know somebody who works at the Met, and he said the biggest problem with drugs and dealing with county lines and large criminal enterprises is prohibition.
Well, yeah.
He said it's like cocaine. It's a losing battle. We're never going to win that battle. Okay, all we're doing is cutting the head off a snake. No, sorry. All he said we're doing is playing whack-a-mole, and we whack one, another one pops up because it's such a huge sprawling system. He said we just need to decriminalize aspects of it and legalize aspects of it. That's what we need to do.
That's interesting to hear from someone of the Met.
It's because he said it's a losing battle. We're just and what's happening is you're letting the worst people run this, and they're fighting and killing, and they're trying to fight over territory, and they're stabbing each other, and you've got kids who've got no. They're living on estates who've got no prospects. So somebody comes along to them and said, "You want some nice trainers? I'll get you some nice trainers. By the way, you can run this package up to Manchester." And they want nice trainers because they want to, they want to call amongst their mates.
I really wanted nice trainers. My mum bought me Mercury trainers when I went to school.
You must have got beaten up.
I was.
Is that how you got so big?
That's why I'm massive now. I carry deep psychological scars from having to wear Mercury trainers, and I only wear Nike trainers now. Oh, Nike and Adidas.
It's just funny. I remember my mum got me some High-Techs, and it was really embarrassing. They're now cool again.
Oh, I would have loved High-Techs. I would have swapped those for my Mercury trainers in an instant. I was also small at school, and I went to for sixth form. I was a school full of rugby players who were about the size I am now at the age of 16, wearing Mercury trainers with non-branded tracksuit bottoms. It was just. I don't think I'll ever recover, to be honest.
Well, look, we need to, this stuff needs fixing. I don't know the answer.
Well, I think we've already touched on one, and I think
talking about it.
Well, educating, and I think a second, and then again, these are not short-term fixes. These are part of a process that neither you or I may live to see the end of, but certainly educating and getting messages out is an important first step. And I think a second one would be, earlier we said, heaven forfend that any of us would go into politics, but perhaps we need to try and work towards a world where people who do have experience of a world outside politics feel the drive to go into it, particularly if you don't need the money. So I think that's
really important.
That is really important. If you are incorruptible and you don't need to take a bribe or you don't need to pander to vested interests, that's an interesting aspect. And I think the third thing I'd mention is, if you are neither of the above, if you're not part of a group who has spent time to educate yourself, and you're not someone who has experience outside politics, speak to people who do. There's a lot of, and my Bitcoin work at the moment is largely a group of relative experts trying to communicate to people who know nothing about the system, nothing about the asset or the network or the ecosystem of businesses that are growing up about it, trying to educate them as much as we can about a complex topic that they know nothing about, that our team knows more, and do that in as polite and as accommodative way as possible.
How's that going, by the way? And does Trump winning and having an administration that's more pro-Bitcoin mining, does that help you here?
So the second question, yes. We have been caught with our pants down, and we're desperately trying to pull them up, I think.
What do you mean by we? We as a country?
As a country. The FCA's attitude in particular is 20 years behind where it should be. In terms of...
Have you talked to them? Is it an open door?
The FCA harder. So we're in a dialogue with Treasury at the moment.
Okay.
Tulip CD have actually got a lot of time for. I think she's switched on. She is bright and she's willing to listen. So I've had we're in dialogue with her on two different aspects. One around ETF access for retail, and one around, I don't know if you saw, we wrote a policy paper on the adoption of Bitcoin as a strategic reserve for the UK. We published that before Trump spoke at Bitcoin 2024.
Okay. Received?
It was received by Treasury, and I had a response to that just 2 weeks ago, which was interesting and positive.
It's not a no.
It's not a no, and Tulip actually said she'd put our paper in front of the relative policy team at Treasury. So it's being read, and I think what happened this week is going to accelerate the interest there. And, our door is fully open. We want to help the government understand the opportunity here. And, the reason I'm wearing a tie, Peter, out of the greatest respect to you, I wouldn't have worn a tie for the meeting. I would have worn a t-shirt, but I'm wearing a tie because I came from a meeting with a hedge fund who were talking about exactly how to capitalize on the opportunity they're seeing here. And I think there's a growing groundswell, that a realization that the UK has a rapidly closing window of opportunity to position itself well here.
I had one of my friends message me yesterday morning. He sent me a bunch of screenshots from his an app that he uses to buy Bitcoin from. And it's the first time he's been on it in a while. And it's suddenly got all these questions. He said, I don't know the fucking answers to these. What are the answers? It's asking questions about, like quite detailed questions for a newbie about what a crypto asset is and, what the laws are. These tests are definitely a barrier. People who've done it failed and won't have been able to go and buy it.
These are the FCA tests.
Yeah, and it's bullshit.
If anyone's having trouble with those, have a look at my pins tweet. So we've done
Have you got the answers?
We've done a video walkthrough of almost every exchange that is available in the UK.
Amazing. But that's insane. So they put a barrier that will stop people. But why does the barrier exist? I am skeptical and suspicious. I don't think it's to protect investors.
It's because, fundamentally, it's because the FCA is extraordinarily risk averse.
Yes.
The current head of the FCA, this is an unsubstantiated rumor, so please don't quote me on this. This is rumor only and speculation. It's not fact. We have heard that he wants the Bank of England job, so he is not going to do anything that exposes any customers to any form of financial loss until his term is up and he moves to the Bank of England. I hope he doesn't get the Bank of England job for personal reasons, which I won't go into on a podcast that will be broadcast.
Please go into that. I want to know.
No, nothing. So the reason those questions exist is because Bitcoin was wrongly classified as a restricted mass market investment. The majority of the industry told the FCA that was rubbish and a stupid thing to do. The FCA acknowledged that in their response to the consultation, and they said, okay, so the majority of people said this was stupid, so we're going to go ahead and do it anyway.
It is frustrating because it's a barrier to people protecting their wealth. Yet at the same time, I'll go on the App Store now.
Well, mate, it's also arguably increasing customer harm because it's not stopping people from buying Bitcoin. They can go and buy from an unregulated exchange somewhere overseas using VPN.
Ladbrokes, Bet365, Paddy Power, BetVictor, Betfred Sports, TalkSport Bet. I didn't even know TalkSport had their own branded bet. William Hill.
You can also buy like a 10x leveraged cocoa futures and Hargreaves Lansdowne.
There you go.
Why on earth are you allowed to do that?
Coral, Betfair, QuinBet, Skybet, StakeMate, Virgin Bet, BetMGM, Betway, BetLive
Virgin
UK,
Bet.
Unibet, Triple
That was me with
Bet,
my Mercury trainers.
Live Score Bet. That's an interesting one. Bally Casino. It's endless. Endless. Look, it's fucking going on forever. Endless betting apps. I can download any of those. I can go and bet on the next point in a game of ping pong played in Taiwan. I can bet on a cricket match in India. I can bet on anything, and I can bankrupt myself very quickly, end up depressed, broke, homeless, divorced. Completely legally. So why can I do that, but I can't go and buy Bitcoin as an asset which I can protect my wealth with?
Well, the answer is it's not because they care about you bankrupting yourself. It's they care about their own reputation. So
I'm more suspicious.
Interesting. I'm actually fairly cynical about it. It's not the FCA don't think Bitcoin is a thing. They don't believe it's real. They think it's a flash in the pan, beanie baby digital bullshit.
Okay.
The Bank of England are better educated about it. We had a Bank of England guy come to our event in April that we put on with HRF, and I've got more time for those guys. I know I publicly troll Andrew Bailey.
Yeah.
The Bank of England Andrew Bailey, not our resistance money friend. No, shout out to Andrew
and the resistance money crew.
Yes, great book. But I think that they're more scared about stablecoins than they are about Bitcoin.
Why are they scared of stablecoins?
I think because stablecoins can be issued by entities other than the Bank of England or a commercial bank.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Well, I agree it's a good thing, but
that's literally what we want. We want to take the issuance of money away from the central banks.
You and I do. I don't think the central bank necessarily want to give it up.
Yeah, of course they don't. I mean,
no.
we don't let turkeys vote for Christmas for a reason.
No. But have you seen that graph of Turkey's life satisfaction mapped against the time to Thanksgiving? Oh, it's wonderful. Connor, can you find it's life satisfaction of Turkey against Thanksgiving, and then it drops off an absolute cliff. Basically, on the 24th of November, you get rugged. And it goes
poor fuckers.
Poor turkeys.
But yeah, I mean, look, it's the whole thing's a mess in every single fucking direction, and it's that realization that I came to. I don't know if you ever came to this realization. You know when you're when you're a kid and your dad's maybe like 30, 40 years old, and you look at him, it's like this big fucking man thing who's like an adult and makes big decisions, and I'm just a little kid. And then you get to the age yourself, you're like, oh, I'm still that same moron I was yesterday. And,
100%.
And I think that's a realization you come to as a parent. Like, fuck, I'm just a moron. I've got to like raise this kid.
Well, don't say that. He's right there.
He knows. But it's the same. Then you come to that second realization is that, all these people in high-powered positions in government, in institutions, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. No. They're just people.
They're just like you and I.
Yeah, they're just like you and I, and they can easily be there without any of the ability or the qualifications, the skills to do the job they're doing. Yet the decisions they make can have profound ripple effects through all of society.
I saw a tweet when my kids were young, and you know how hard it is when they were 5 and 3, I think. And someone said, the experience of having kids at this age is, at some point the grown-ups are gonna come and save us, aren't they? And then there's like a long line of blank lines, and then just at the bottom, they're not coming, are they? But
it's like realization.
Government's not going to save you. We've identified a lot of the things that are wrong with a current system, and my main message to people is do what you can to help yourself. And if that's moving what savings you have into hard assets that can't be diluted or confiscated or debased, that is one thing you can do. And another is, read as much as you can. Read Economics in One Lesson. That's a great book. You can read that in 2 days. Try and understand what has gone wrong with the system. Don't over-leverage yourself. Leverage is what kills you. The companies we've been chatting about doing this session, the ones that went bust, they were over-leveraged. They couldn't service their debt. Governments, sovereign debt problem. As long as you can keep servicing your debt, you can stay alive. As long as you can keep creating your own currency, then you're never going to go insolvent as a country.
Because you can buy your own debt.
Well, you'll just turn to Zimbabwe.
You know how that turned out.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Well, listen. I hope. I'm confident of things improving, but not in the short term.
That's a good summary.
Yeah, I think we have a short-term problem, but I do think there's like this awakening that's happening. And I do sense that people know there's a problem. And I think voter turnout being low is a good, strong signal for that. I just don't think people really know where to look for the solution, and I don't think people really know what it is. So it's important to get out there and teach people and just educate people and talk to them about it. It was brilliant the other day. I was having dinner with my kids, and we were talking about this with my daughter. I mean, she's 14 years old, and I said to her, we were talking about government, and I was like, well, what will they do? She said, well, they'll just print more money. And I said, and what does that mean? She said, inflation. I was like, fucking good. we've got to educate all ages about this. We've got to educate everyone. We've got to get this to as many people as possible. That people need to understand the function of government, how they work, how they operate, and this sovereign debt issue that we've got, and we have to force change and force better standards from our politicians. And I think you'll do a job, I'll do a job. Everybody who has a voice needs to go out there and do a job.
100%.
To force this change. Otherwise, fuck knows where we'll end up, man.
Yeah. Keep talking, keep broadcasting.
Keep
every extra person who comprehends these issues is a good person to have on the team.
All right, man. Well, let's keep going, Freddie. Brother, always good to see you.
You too, man.
Keep doing your thing. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Kurt. See you soon. Bye.